You hear the biggest robbery in UFC history. What is the first thing that comes up to your mind? Let me guess. It is probably a specific fight or a number of fights where the judges seem to have taken a ridiculous decision regarding the result of the contest. And such an answer would be very logical. However, in today's video, we will be talking about a different robbery, a completely different robbery, a robbery in the literal sense of the word. Born on the 12th of November 1977 in Greenwich, London, England, Lee Murray was raised in the family of a British hairdresser, his mother, and a Moroccan cook, his father. He had a terrible relationship with his alcoholic father, who was abusing him on a regular basis. Lee himself was performing poorly at school, purely because his interests lay in playing football and fighting with his peers. And although he was not a very talented footballer, he was a perfect fit for the local street gangs. Committing small crimes and getting into trouble were daily occurrences in young Lee Murray's life, and it was no coincidence that he got expelled from a couple of schools throughout his youth. As the time was passing, the skinny little boy was growing up and turning into a dangerous young man. One day, during an altercation with his father, Lee decided that he could take no more of that disrespect. A neighbor witnessed how the furious Lee turned around, punched his father in the face, and knocked him clean out. From that moment on, two things became clear. One, Lee could no longer live together with his father. And two, Lee was a savage, capable of brutal violence. Shortly after that accident, Lee left home and focused on his newfound passion, lifting weights and injecting steroids. While building an imposing physique, Lee was also making a name for himself in the narco world. At 20 years of age, he had already established himself as a high-profile drug dealer whose brutality and wild temperament scared not only his subordinates but also the local authorities. However, in spite of making plenty of money through his illegal deeds, in spite of the notoriety, in spite of the expensive cars, there was still something missing in Lee's life. What was that? That was the sport which he was born to excel in: mixed martial arts. The 21 years old Lee Murray joined a local MMA gym with the only intention of eventually stepping in the cage and competing. Tall, rangy and aggressive, he was learning the stand-up aspect of the sport very quickly, but his wrestling and grappling were falling behind. However, after moving to the United States and joining the training camp of the former UFC welterweight champion Pat Miletich, Lee Murray managed to change these weaknesses to improve on them, and eventually, by the end of his career, he managed to turn them into strengths. Building up a record of 7 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw, and 1 no contest, Lee Murray eventually signed with the UFC in 2004. His debut for the organization was more than impressive. He submitted Jorge Rivera with a triangle armbar in the first round. In the post-fight interview with Joe Rogan, he called out Tito Ortiz, one of the biggest stars in the company at the time.
If he wants to fight me, I'll fight anybody. I don't care who they are, what they've done. How many men they've knocked out, I couldn't give a shit. Who they are, I will fight them. I'm not scared of no man. I will give up weight. Congratulations, Lee.
Things seemed to be going Lee's way. He was improving as a mixed martial artist, he was fighting on the biggest stage, and he was receiving the support of the UK audience. And the fight against Tito Ortiz seemed to be a logical decision for the company. Several months prior to his UFC debut, Lee Murray had knocked clean out Tito Ortiz in front of a nightclub in a crazy street brawl.
Tito Ortiz came running past me, ripping his jacket off, and he was going after Lee Murray. There's Lee Murray backing up, ripping his jacket off. Tito threw 3-punch combination. Lee Murray ducked out of the way of every punch and returned fire, threw about a 5-punch combination, and every single punch landed.
Lee put him to sleep. He was sleeping before he hit the floor.
This clash, if brought to the UFC octagon, would most certainly be a big money fight, which would spark a lot of attention and have many people watching. However, it would never take place, at least officially. Murray could simply not stay away from trouble. Once again, after an altercation in front of a nightclub in London, he decided to use his fists in search of a solution. And although that way usually worked out good for him, this time he got unlucky. Another man stabbed him in the chest and in the head. Full of adrenaline, Murray kept on fighting until he realized that the blood pouring from his chest and head was not caused by a punch but by a knife. He jumped into a random car and asked the two unknown, shocked girls sitting there to bring him to the hospital. Their quick reaction, together with the desperate efforts of the nurses, saved Lee's life. However, the scars which that incident left on Lee Murray's body made the UFC promoters doubt whether they needed such a fighter in the promotion. It is important to mention that at that time, MMA was still seen as an underground sport, and the bosses of the most influential organizations were doing everything in their powers to change that negative reputation. In addition, Lee had problems with his US visa after being convicted for aggressively attacking another man in a road incident. In other words, it was all over before it had even started. After competing only once for the UFC, Lee Murray was told that he would never again step foot in the UFC octagon. In spite of the huge disappointment, he initially refused to give up on his MMA dream and signed with a UK-based promotion, Cage Rage, where he faced a future legend of the sport, the one and only Anderson Silva, for the vacant middleweight title. In a competitive contest, the Spider seemed to be a step ahead in the majority of the exchanges and managed to eventually secure a unanimous decision victory for himself. Later on, he would go on to first conquer and then rule the middleweight division of the UFC for many years. For Lee Murray, however, that fight would mark the end of his mixed martial arts career, of his mixed martial arts journey, and the switch to a new career, a career which he had been engaging in throughout his whole life, if we were to be honest. We have all heard the story of the problem child, the kid who was getting into trouble, but eventually joined an MMA gym or a boxing gym and completely changed, found discipline and found the right path in their life. Well, that was not the case of Lee Murray. Partying, drinking heavily, looking for conflicts, knocking random people out. Lee Murray was a wild man, a savage, who was always getting into trouble throughout his whole life. And although he had already been involved in plenty of crazy incidents, although he had crossed the line on multiple occasions, what was about to follow was absolutely unprecedented. Not only in his own life, but also in the history of the United Kingdom. The evening of February the 21st, 2006, after another normal day at the office, Colin Dixon, the warehouse manager of Securitas, a company storing the banknotes of the Bank of England, was on his way home with his car, going home to see his wife and his little daughter. At some stage, he got stopped by a police car. The agents stepped out of the car and walked towards Colin, showing him their badges. Then, they forced him to step out of his car. They handcuffed and pushed him towards their own car and told him that if he cooperated, he would be fine. Pointing a gun at his face, they left him with no choice. Scared to death, he was forced to oblige. Step 1 was successfully executed. The fake policeman, wearing fake eBay badges, captured the man who had the keys to the warehouse. Next, their colleagues, who were located in front of Colin's house, knocked on the door and told Colin's wife that her husband had been in a terrible car crash and that his life was in terrible danger. Extremely worried about his life, Colin's wife and daughter trusted the police officers and jumped into their van, believing that they were going to the local hospital. All of a sudden, they also got handcuffed, and the police officers, all of which were in makeup so that they would be unrecognizable, assured them that as long as they cooperated, they would be safe. Step 2 was also successfully executed. The wife and the child were kidnapped. Now it was showtime. Shortly after midnight, a group of 7 masked men arrived at the Securitas warehouse. One of them, accompanied by Colin Dixon, the manager, walked towards the gates dressed as a police officer. The frightened Colin, scared for the lives of his wife and daughter, ordered his employee standing at the door to open it. Upon entering the warehouse, Colin got tackled to the ground by the fake policeman, while a group of 6 masked robbers armed with pistols and guns entered the building. All employees were commanded to lay down on the ground, and they were all threatened that if anyone was to start the alarm system, they would all be in big trouble. The mastermind of the whole operation was Lee Murray, who was holding an AK-47 and a stopwatch, giving instructions to his colleagues. The criminals entered the room where all the money was stored and started loading bags of cash in their van. After 45 minutes of packing and piling up, the robbers had managed to take only 15% of the cash in the building, purely because their van was already full, with 53 million pounds of cash being loaded, with all employees, together with Colin, his wife and daughter, being forced to go into closed cages. The criminal gang was all set. Now they could simply go away. At around 3 AM in the morning, the van left the area, and it wasn't until a couple of hours later that one of the intimidated employees actually gathered the courage to step out of their cage and call the police. However, it was already too late. The offenders had already become multimillionaires. But how was it possible that they were so familiar with the inside of the warehouse, having in mind that none of them had ever stepped foot inside the warehouse? The answer is very simple. They had an inside person, an Albanian immigrant who had already been working in the warehouse for a couple of months. He had been carrying a small camera attached behind his belt, filming the interior of the building and providing his associates with prices, information and details. So when it was time to conduct the whole operation, the robbers had already studied the place, they knew all details, and it was simply smooth sailing. The escape was successful. They were rich, they were safe, they made it. The biggest robbery in the history of the United Kingdom was a fact. 53 million pounds was stolen in cash. The British authorities were shocked. Such arrogance and impudence were unheard of. Immediate action was taken. The news about the robbery was spread everywhere. It was broadcast on radio, television, there were articles written in the newspapers. Everybody was talking about it. Any person who could be of assistance, anybody who knew anything, would be rewarded a big financial compensation by the government. It was a matter of time before the authorities found a crack in the organization. The girlfriend of one of the bank robbers, who was also the makeup artist who helped the robbers to change their facial expressions before the robbery, decided to testify. The names and details which she revealed helped the police to arrest 5 of the offenders in the upcoming couple of weeks. Lee Murray anticipated that he would be next, which is why he took a plane and flew to Morocco, the country which his father came from. Together with him was his most loyal friend Paul Allen, who had been having his back ever since they were children, and who had also been part of the crew that robbed the Securitas warehouse. But why exactly Morocco? Very simple. Lee Murray had inherited a local citizenship purely because his father was Moroccan. What that meant was that he could not be extradited from Morocco to Great Britain. At that time, it was not allowed by the law. Put differently, the British government could not arrest or bring Lee Murray to the United Kingdom, which made Lee feel invincible. Lee was living the life. Expensive cars, partying, watches, women, drugs, cocaine, marijuana. Together with his best friend Paul Allen, he was enjoying the fruits of his non-existent labor. An endless dream, a beautiful life, the life of a winner. But how long could that dream go on for? Actually, it was already finished. Finished before it had even started. Just like his UFC career. On the 25th of June 2006, while walking around in an expensive shopping center in Morocco, together with his right hand Paul Allen, Lee Murray got arrested by the local authorities. Lee Murray did not surrender voluntarily. He started fighting with the police agents in a desperate attempt to escape. Obviously, the powers were uneven, and Murray, together with his most loyal friend Paul Allen, got arrested and taken into custody. While Paul was extradited to the United Kingdom, Lee Murray remained in Morocco, where he was initially sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, after being caught preparing for an escape from prison, Lee Murray had to hear from the local judges that his stay in the local jail would be prolonged until 2035. In other words, for a total of 29 years. There was nothing he could do about that. His freedom was taken. Separated from his best friend Paul Allen, he was all alone in a Moroccan jail cell. It was only him and his regrets. He could have had a more successful MMA career. He could have possibly become a champion. He did have the talent. He did have that wild mentality. But he messed it up. He used all the talent, all the gifts for the wrong purpose with the wrong intentions. And he failed. In an interview for Bloody Elbow back in 2018, Lee Murray shared that his only dream in life was to step back in that octagon again, to fight and to win a title. However, the chances of this happening seem to be very, very slim, if not delusional. Have in mind that he will be 58 years old when his sentence expires. And deep down, he knows that his time is gone. He made the wrong choices and he had to pay for them. Karma is not a bitch. Karma is a mirror.